those leads and understanding what they're looking at, right? So if I put the heart over this, then we're trying to determine what these are actually looking at, right? So these leads look at what part of the heart?
Side.
Yeah, they look at the side of the heart. In medical terminology, that is called
Lateral.
lateral. So these look at the lateral part of the heart, right? What do these look at?
Inferior.
At the bottom of the heart. So these look at the inferior portion of the heart, right? What does this look at?
The medial. Oh,
Inferior.
Left. Right. My goodness, how many medical terms can we throw out?
Right
What is this
side.
part of the heart?
The right side of the heart.
Good job. These look at the right side of the heart. Does that make sense?
why is that not medial?
Where is medial?
Towards the middle and it kind of goes down.
Yeah, the medial is in the middle,
Okay.
and these leads are over here. So what part of the heart are they looking at?
The right side.
Okay? Okay. So those are all of our limb leads. Now you have your precordial leads. The precordial leads travel in what plane? First of all, what plane are these in?
X plane.
The X-Men.
There you go. The coronal plane. These are in the coronal plane. What plane are the precordial leads in? In the transverse plane. So they're going this direction, looking towards the center of the heart. That make sense? We just were in this plane, the coronal plane, and now we're in the transverse plane, going this way around the heart. Because we're trying to get a three-dimensional picture, right? We now know what's happening this direction in the heart, but we don't know what's happening this direction with the heart. And that's where the precordial leads come into play. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So on the precordial leads, where are they located?
This is the heart.
Right.
Right side to septum.
One is right, two is middle.
Good. Booms are good.
One,
Name the booms.
one is on the right
V1,
side.
V2, V3, V4, V5, V6.
Okay, so
V1 and V2
V1.
is septum.
B2, B4, B3, B5, and B6. I write them smaller because they're going around the corners.
Yep.
You can't see them. Yeah? Good? So this is what we're looking at. V1 looks at what?
Septum.
More specifically, what's it look at?
Front.
Right atria.
The right side, because remember, these coronary vessels, the left anterior descending coronary vessels, travel the septum, yes?
Yes.
Between the right and left. But we're not splitting the septum, because why? Because the heart is shifted, that's right. So we're actually looking directly at the right side on V1, where it sees the septum and it sees the right ventricle. V2 is over here, where it sees primarily the septum and maybe a little skosh of the right and a little skosh of the anterior. Right? Skosh. V3 and V4 look at the anterior of the left ventricle. If this were shifted back, that would be the anterior. Right? So you have to understand the orientation of the heart. So it's looking at the anterior portion of the left ventricle.
You're saying V3 and V4?
Yep. Then as we go around with 5 and 6, it's looking at what portion of the heart? The lateral again, where V6 and basically V6 and lead 1 look at almost the same, well they do, look at the exact same portion of the heart. The depth at which those two leads look is different, but what it's pointed at is the same. So for this, we have these two that are lateral leads, these two that are anterior leads, these two that are septal leads, and specifically V1 is also a right lead.
V1 and V6 are looking at the same direction, but they're looking at it from the opposite sides.
They're not.
V6 is low.
V1 is located here, and V6 is located here.
So they're looking right across each other.
Yeah, but they're not, they're about 20 degrees off the,
Okay, but
the
close,
90.
close to about 70 degrees in between,
No, greater than 90 degrees between them.
110.
110 degrees.
Yeah, they're all 20 degrees off of each other.
Okay. But they're crossing at the same point, interior of the heart. Okay.
Yeah, they all, so all of the precordial leads travel to the center of the heart. Does that make sense?
So you're not gonna be able to have like anti-leads, like the way we talked about with the,
You can and you can't. It's a little bit more difficult on those precordial leads to see some of that. You do see a little bit, especially in V1 and V2. V1 and V2 does show you a little bit of the posterior, but it is a little bit more difficult. So like V6 and lead 1, even though those two are looking at the exact same thing, you do see a little bit of a difference in those two leads. You would expect them to be exactly identical, but they're not because of where that negative is actually found. So you do see a little bit that happens on the other side because it's not because you do get a little bit of crossover of what's happening around that area, but it's not an exact look like what you'd see in a lead that goes all the way through.
How do they play? Sorry, go ahead.
it's okay.
One of you.
How do they place the negative spot in the center of the heart?
It's an algorithm that the machine does. That's based on, it takes these leads, it takes what these leads are coming up with in all of the measurements that it's coming up with, and the placement of all of these leads together, and then it creates an algorithm that estimates what the middle of the
So it's
heart is.
impossible to just do a V. What's the second part called?
It wouldn't work.
Okay.
You'd have to have the rest of the leads too. That's why the 12 leads put on, it's always a separate set of cables that's put on separately. You have to have these first to get into the correct algorithm. Right? If
Sure.
you just did these, not only would you only have one wire, because you wouldn't have the thing that's creating the negative, which would be your second wire, you also don't have your ground. Right? So you have to have the limb leads on in order to see the rest of the 12 leads. Okay. What portion of the heart is not represented at all currently?
Posterior.
The posterior part of the heart is not represented. And we do have a lot of MIs in the posterior. There's a lot of muscle mass in the posterior. So they are not represented. Which leads would be the most logical to let us see that there might be something with the posterior?
You say it's not represented at all, we can get an idea of what it looks like just by the leads that we currently have, because it's synced all the way through the heart.
Absolutely. So I'll re-ask my question.
Okay.
Good job.
So my question, which Chandler is asking in a different way, is exactly that. We don't, the posterior is not represented by a direct camera, right? But which leads give us a clue, the best clue of what might be happening in the posterior?
V6.
The posterior being back here. Which leads might give us the best clue that perhaps something is wrong back there.
V6.
Okay? I've heard V6 a couple times.
V3 and 4, V3
One.
and V4?
The inferior leads are all down here,
No.
maybe?
Any
So eventually we can just name them all.
Yeah, all of them.
And then one of them has to be right. AVL and one.
No ideas with clear distinction of why they might show the best?
Would they show reciprocal changes? Would,
Where?
I was thinking reciprocal changes in V3 and V4. But I,
So down here is showing you reciprocal changes to the back.
or,
You need to do all your three leads,
or V1, V2
kind of focus to the center, but then they,
V1,
Why don't we just move
V1,
leads to the
V2?
back?
You can. We call that a 15
That
lead.
wasn't the question, Mullins.
But I was trying to, if we're gonna do it, let's
We
just do
we
it.
call it a 15 lead. But what would give you a clue that you even needed to think about doing a 15 lead?
Someone's in a lot of chest pain, it
Inferior?
doesn't show on
It
the
doesn't show
current
anywhere
12
else.
lead, so we'll just.
But it will show someplace.
2, 3, 8.
Where?
What will you
right.
see?
Let's
What's
just do
that?
it.
What's that?
V1 through V4.
V1, V2.
V1 and V2, which are sitting directly opposite of the posterior. So in V1 and V2, what would you see that would make you go, I really think that we need to look at the posterior because I think there's a problem with the posterior? ST depression. That's right. And with V1 and V2, we see a characteristic ST depression that we look at. So there's a lot of different ways that you might see ST depression. But in V1 and V2, if you see something that is like this, if you see something that looks similar to this, we call them carousel ponies.
What?
I got it.
I don't.
Can you draw
There's
a
the horse
carousel
on-
in the
Yeah, there's the
leads?
tail and the
Yeah, here's
ears.
the saddle. This is the back of the saddle. Here's the pole that's going up to the horse.
Okay,
They're called carousel ponies.
that's weird.
I will not.
Of course.
In any event, I don't care how Wiki doesn't understand what people call it. In any event, if you see this kind of characteristic ST depression in V1 and V2, it is typically characteristic of a posterior lung. And we would go ahead and finish up our, if we have the ability to, you can just finish out your 12 lead into a 15 lead, go around the, continue in the, which rib space are we in right now? What rib space did V6 end in?
Fifth.
In the fifth rib space. We would just continue in the fifth rib space to the spine. So we would do, V7 would be the posterior axillary line. Then V8 would be kind of center-ish on that.
On fifth.
Yep, in the fifth rib space. V9 would be right basically close to the spine. 10 would be almost on the spine. And that would give you the,
Sorry, which
I'm
lead?
sorry, 7, 8, and 9 is all we need. 7 would be the anterior lead, 8 would be in the middle.
Which leads do you take?
Yeah, which,
4, 5,
which,
6?
which 3 leads do you take?
It doesn't matter at that point in time. You just take off any, usually we'll take like, just move 4, 5, and 6 to 7, 8, and 9.
The last bottom
Oh.
page.
So then you don't have a lateral.
Show up in 4, 5, and 6 then.
And you'll have to make a note
So
on
set,
the EKG. There's a couple of different ways that you can do that, but you'd have to make a note on the EKG, because the EKG would not interpret it. The EKG just interprets it as if they're in the right place.
Yeah.
So you'd have to physically write on the EKG that this is a, that this is a posterior 12 lead or a 15 lead, and you would change where it says V4, V5, and 6, you change it to 7, 8, 9.
And
So-
because you see in V1 and V2, your little pony there, you'd want to keep that. That way you can take 4, 5, and 6 and do 7, 8,
You would
9.
just move 4, 5, and 6
That way
around.
you'd have V1 to V2 and
And
the
7, 8, 9.
lateral posterior
That's correct.
equivalent.
That's correct.
So they've just decided it's not worth to have a separate little like lateral, like just have a separate like
3 more
V,
leads.
yeah, like 3 more leads you could just plug in.
There's a lot of expense in doing that, to add 3 more wires to the mix and make the computer
Software changes.
software algorithm changes to recognize that. And there's not a reason for it, because we can just do it this way when we see a posterior mine. Posterior mines aren't as common as, say, anterior mines, lateral MIs. So those are the ones that are most important. And 7, 8, 9 are a little inconvenient to get to, because you have to keep your patient propped up to get them. But that's what you'd be looking for those. Does that make sense so far? Okay, so some things to look at.
Can we have like 4-minute break?
Make it a 3-minute break. We are ending class a little bit early today, but